Hey everyone, before the video begins, I just want to let you guys know that I am now currently streaming on Twitch on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, starting at 11 PM Eastern Standard Time. Hope to see you there, and with that, on to the video. This is Punch-Out!, a simple idea for a simple game. One that has gone from being one of the most popular NES games of all time to one of Nintendo's most criminally overlooked series. Punch-Out! Has had quite an interesting history, from being a collaboration with legendary boxer Mike Tyson to appearing in Nintendo's biggest crossover, Super Smash Bros. Now, boxing games have been around since the dawn of Atari, and even Punch-Out! Isn't the only boxing series out there for video games. But the amount of passion, charm, and personality put into the series truly makes it stand out from the crowd, making it my favorite boxing series by a long shot. It's been a good while since Nintendo has acknowledged this series, so I thought I'd take a look back at its history to see how the tale of Little Mac came to be. With that said, I'm ArinTheWolf, and this is a Punch-Out! Retrospective. It's the early 1980s. Arcade games were becoming some of the most popular forms of entertainment of the time. Bars and restaurants filled with games like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Galaga. The original Punch-Out! Was created by Nintendo's general manager Genyo Takeda, following the success of Nintendo's Donkey Kong. Punch-Out!'s characters were designed by the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto himself, and the game was also the debut of the iconic Nintendo composer Koji Kondo. Yep, the same guy who composed the iconic main themes for both Mario and Legend of Zelda got his start composing the original arcade Punch-Out!. You may be wondering why the Nintendo Switch version of the game looks like how it does. Well, due to the excessive amounts of screens that Nintendo had from Donkey Kong's success, Punch-Out! Used two different screens in the arcade, one for the boxers and one for the timer and health bars. Because of this, Punch-Out! Was quite revolutionary for arcade games back then. It gave us a ton of the series' iconic characters like Glass Joe, Bald Bull, and Mr. Sandman. To make sure that the players could see their opponent, the series protagonist Little Mac was given this wireframe look due to the hardware limitations of the time. Punch-Out! Was well received back in the day, even if it wasn't as popular as Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, and after playing it myself, I can see why. The original Punch-Out! Just isn't as timeless as other games that came out before it. Everything in this game just happens so fast that it's hard to have a coherent strategy playing it. It may have been revolutionary for its time, but if you ask me, I'd rather go back to Pac-Man or Galaga. Those games are still fun to play 40 years later. Regardless, Punch-Out!'s success led to several arcade spin-offs like Super Punch-Out!. Super Punch-Out! Is essentially the same game as before, except with new, more difficult boxers put in. These boxers include iconic characters such as Bear Hugger, Great Tiger, Soda Popinski, and Super Macho Man. Insert a joke about the Village People or Randy Savage here. Fun fact though, Soda Popinski was first known in the original Super Punch-Out! As Vodka Drunkensky. Nintendo then decided to rename him from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! To avoid any controversies for having a family-friendly game reference the consumption of alcohol. The last spin-off during this period was simply known as arm wrestling. Okay, so post-production Arin here. So I thought for the longest time while writing this script that arm wrestling used an actual plastic arm controller in the arcades to simulate arm wrestling. But as I was gathering footage and music for this video, I've come to discover, no, that's not the case. It just used a regular joystick. Now, arcade machines that use plastic arm controllers definitely exist, but not for this game. So, oops. So yeah, arm wrestling, in fact, did not use a plastic arm controller, it just used a standard joystick. Just making that correction right here and now. Alright, back to the video. It also reportedly used some voice clips from Han from the Bruce Lee film Enter the Dragon. Arm wrestling wasn't received nearly as well as the previous two games, with many saying that it misrepresented what arm wrestling was actually like. Nowadays, you can find both Punch-Out! And Super Punch-Out! On the Nintendo Switch as part of the Arcade Archive series. But arm wrestling has never received any sort of re-release whatsoever, making it another game lost to the sands of time. I've rarely seen this arcade cabinet being played much at all. Only a handful of videos of people playing it exist on the internet, but considering how much of a cash grab it felt even back then, I can't say it's all that surprising. By 1995, Nintendo was shifting its focus away from making arcade cabinets to developing games for their hot new product, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Then, in 1987, Genyo Takeda and Little Mac would soon get their big break with Mike Tyson's Punch-Out on the NES. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was released on the NES to glowing reviews, with some critics even considering it one of the best games on the system. Frankly, I'm right there with them. Punch-Out on the NES is one of my favorite games on a system that I'm honestly not too interested in, and that should tell you how well this game has stood the test of time. Sure, other more beloved Nintendo franchises outside of Mario and Zelda would get their start on the NES, like Metroid and Kid Icarus, but Punch-Out was considered one of Nintendo's biggest titles back then. Punch-Out NES also brought us some of the franchise's most iconic characters, like Von Kaiser, King Hippo, and Don Flamenco. Of course, it had the rising champion Mike Tyson, and let me tell you, he was no joke. Mike Tyson has gone down in infamy for being one of the most difficult video game bosses of all time, with his insanely fast punches and how quickly he can end the match at any time. To this day, only a handful of people have ever taken down Iron Mike. Hell, not even Mike Tyson himself stood a chance against him. But wait, you may ask, if Mike Tyson is a part of Punch-Out's history, why does my digital version of it have someone named Mr. Dream? Well, most people would like to claim the reason was his sexual convictions, but that's actually not the case. Mike Tyson is not in the original Punch-Out anymore because Mike's contract with Nintendo expired. Not to mention he eventually lost his title to James Buster Douglas, which destroyed any interest Nintendo had in renewing a contract with him. So, Nintendo decided to replace him with a fictional character named Mr. Dream, who, frankly, is a pretty generic boxer, all things considered. You may be wondering if Nintendo ever actually did anything with Mike Tyson again after this, and surprisingly, yeah, they were originally going to work on another game where you play as Mike Tyson boxing aliens from outer space. That game was going to be called Mike Tyson's Intergalactic Power Punch. However, because of the legal troubles happening to Mike Tyson at the time, they removed his likeness and gave the protagonist a generic name instead, and changed the title to Power Punch 2. Needless to say, it was a gigantic failure. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that it was released in 1992, when the Super Nintendo had already been out for a full year in America and 2 years in Japan. Or maybe it was because the game sucks balls! Now, I thought that I was perfectly safe from having to play this game since it didn't look like it was that accessible. However, this game has been released on Steam. Yes, somebody somewhere cared enough about Power Punch 2 to release it on Steam. Who asked for this? I mean, really, who asked for this? Did anybody out there need to have this game playable in their Steam collection? Whatever the case, I paid money for this game, and let me tell you, even though I got it on sale for $2, I still feel incredibly ripped off. No one should ever have to play this game, but frankly, why would you? In fact, why do you even care what someone thinks about Power Punch 2? The game sucks. End of story. Bye-bye. See you later. After the success of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and the failure that was Pathetic Punch 2, it wouldn't be until 1994 where we'd see the Bronx Boxer return in Super Punch-Out for the SNES. By the 90s, home console games were slowly catching up to the same level of quality as arcade games had back in the 80s. Even though Super Punch-Out doesn't play exactly like the original, it's still my preferred way of playing the game. It was also the game where Genyo Takeda ascended into being a producer for the game, with Makoto Wada and Yasuyuki Oyagi as directors. Although Super Punch-Out is great, there are a few things that hold it back from being better than the NES version. Much like the original arcade games, there isn't that much of a flow to this game. Most of the time, you'll both just randomly throw punches at each other until one of you falls. I know that just sounds like regular boxing, but you'll see what I mean when we get to the latest game in the series. Also, the music isn't nearly as memorable as the NES games. That game's soundtrack has become some of the most iconic SNES music of all time, while this game's soundtrack is just kind of meh. That said, the graphics do look better than the series has ever looked before, so that's saying something. Regardless, with 2 hit games underneath his champion belt, it seemed like Little Mac's career would take off to new heights. And then, just as soon as his career truly began, he vanished. 15 years went by without a single new game. Ever since Super Punch-Out, the series had only made a handful of appearances in other games. Some of these cameos include Little Mac as a playable character in the GameCube version of Fight Night Round 2, as well as Little Mac as an assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. He also appeared in a Japan-only game known as Captain Rainbow, where he really needed some work. But then in 2009, Little Mac as well as Punch-Out would make one of the greatest gaming comebacks of all time with Punch-Out on the Nintendo Wii. Now this is what I'm talking about. Punch-Out Wii was developed by Next Level Games, who not only developed the badass Mario Strikers games, but also Luigi's Mansion 2 and 3. It's safe to say that Next Level Games knows how to bring back a franchise because Punch-Out on Wii is an absolute blast. Sure, its roster may be mostly returning characters, but this is without a doubt the definitive Punch-Out game by a long shot. Remember when I said that the flow of a Punch-Out game was important? This game is why. This game has the flow of a rhythmic puzzle game in all the right ways. It's a game that rewards you for studying your opponent's attacks and movements to know when to dodge or attack. Speaking of which, this game's animation has literally some of the best animation I've ever seen in a video game. Every single character is expressive, cartoony, and incredibly satisfying to beat. On top of that, each character speaks in their native languages as well. It does suck though that we don't at least get some subtitles to know what they're saying, since I'm sure they're saying some nasty things to Little Mac in this game. On top of that, the game also has one of my favorite game soundtracks of all time. Sure, each character's theme is just the main theme, but they use various styles of music and instrumentations to represent the opponent's nationality. Oh yeah, did I mention this game is beautiful? I love the cel-shaded art style the game uses, making for the right balance of realism and cartoony. Really, anytime I see cel-shaded art styles in a game, it looks really good. So yeah, you can clearly tell that I love this game. I'd even go as far to say that it's one of my favorite games of all time. Sure, some bosses may be a royal pain to figure out and beat, but the amount of charm and passion put into this game is truly something to be admired. And people really did like it, since it went on to sell 1.27 million units. Man, I'm so happy that because of the success of this game, Nintendo would go on to make more Punch-Out games bigger and better, right? Right? Much like before Punch-Out Wii, the series hasn't had another game made in about 12 years as I'm writing this. Sure, Little Mac was introduced as a playable character in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, but the most recognition the series has received since then is its arcade games being ported to the Nintendo Switch. Just recently though, Mike Tyson has allegedly said that a new Punch-Out game is in the works, but from what I've seen, it's really more of a rumor than anything. Unfortunately, Punch-Out is in the same boat as Kid Icarus, Pikmin, and Metroid, where we simply don't know when or if a new game is coming out. It's no secret that Nintendo's best-selling franchises are Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, and of course, Super Smash Bros. Now I can definitely see how a new Punch-Out game would take a long time to develop, since the animations and gameplay are very important for the series, but it's still been a long time since the Wii game. That's a shame, because Punch-Out is a part of Nintendo's history. It was the start of Koji Kondo's career as a game composer, it collaborated with one of the biggest boxers of the 80s, and it was one of the most unique arcade games back then. The series really deserves more recognition than it gets because it's just so good. I don't really know what else to say at this point. Just give us another Punch-Out game, Nintendo! Until then, my name is ArinTheWolf, and I hope you all take care. Stay strong, and live life.